Deputy Budget Administrator for Howard County. Holly Sun is not able to join us this morning, so I'll be introducing our speakers. We have 4 presentations, so we'll get started right away. I'm having some issues turning one of my cameras, so you won't be able to see my face this morning, so consider yourself lucky. Anyway, before I introduce the speakers, just a couple reminders about the virtual process. Hopefully you can see the document I'm sharing. If you have any technical issues, logging in, anything technical, send an email to SAAC@howardcountymd.gov. And we have a couple people from our technology department reviewing the emails, and they'll respond to you promptly. Also, if you're not speaking, please mute yourself so we don't hear the background noise. And if you are speaking, make sure after you finish your speaking to mute yourself. If you have any questions, please wait until the presentations are completed. We've set aside about 10 minutes after each presentation for Q&A. And also just a reminder that our meetings are public, so it'll be recorded and posted to the county's website, and it's also going to be streamed to YouTube. Today we have a full agenda. We have, as I mentioned, 4 presentations. The first one is going to be Dr. Irani from Towson University. He's going to do a presentation on the economic outlook, followed by Jeff Bonown from Planning and Zoning. He will be discussing our long-term demographic and land development trends. And then we'll have a presentation from Howard Community College and also Howard County Library System. Just kind of a heads up for next week, we'll have Dr. Clinch talking about his personal income forecast for the county. And we're also hoping to have the school system discuss their operating and capital budget needs. The schools are having, the superintendent is going to be proposing his budget to actually this evening. So hopefully next week they'll have something to share with us, especially about the cost associated with mandates from the Kerwin legislation. Okay, so we can get started. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Irani to do his presentation. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. See if I can share my content. You have my presentation, right, Brooke? So could you? Okay.
Yes. So let me. Okay, so if one of our technical guys can make me, I guess, a presenter so I can share. Oh, okay, so I think somebody was able to put it on. Okay. Dr. Irani, are you the one that put on the presentation?
I think I might have. I'm having a little bit of a, there we go. Let me see if I can do this. This is. So I'm not seeing any presentation on my screen. Is there one on everyone else's?
Okay, so yeah, it's just your Outlook screen, I think, is showing up. So if someone can make me the presenter, then I can show it on my side. Okay, let me know when you see it.
All right, I see it now.
Okay.
All right, well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me. Nothing is more invigorating than an economic outlook at 7:06 in the morning. I certainly will try and be brief and to the point. So we're going to look at the national economy, some of the trends that are kind of going on in there, as well as some of the Maryland specific things. But the punchline really, I think, is really this. So, if we were to look and a couple of takeaways, one of the things that's really kind of throttling our growth has been the labor force participation rate. And I'll get to that. But essentially, that has been a bit lower than it has been historically. And as a result, we're seeing basically, while we're seeing low unemployment numbers, we're seeing basically, many businesses running shorthanded, many businesses you're not able to open for the full week, and that's sort of something that's been sort of kind of going on. That is also in line with the Great Resignation that many people have heard in the press. But what the upshot of that is, it really is that's limiting our ability to kind of continue to grow forward, and whether that's a permanent feature or not, that's also going to dictate basically how the economy goes forward. So, we're in a quite a tumultuous times. I would argue that we've got, political challenges. Build Back Better is probably not going to get passed. We've got, supply chain issues, not only here within the U.S., but worldwide. We've got another Greek variant, Omicron variant, sort of kind of come through. We've still got several other Greek letters to work through the alphabet. We've got a large portion of the population that is vaccinated, but we also have a large portion that is not. We've got mask mandates in some states and mask mandates not in other states. We have childcare shortages. We have a whole host of things that are really sort of pushing against the economy. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So, GDP, we have recovered from the pandemic to some degree, but again, part of this throttling of GDP at about most recent data at 2% shows that basically, or 2.3%, excuse me, shows that basically those labor shortage issues, supply chain issues, rising prices are really going to have been impacting. Now we're looking at these things. GDP is really composed of sort of four components: consumption, private investment, government spending, and net exports. Next slide, please. Consumption is about 70% of our economy. We're about a see it, want it, buy it type mentality. We did see most recent data for consumption expenditures in December actually go down as many people pulled back or could not find things to buy. But really, the strength of the economy is really being driven by, to some degree, how strong consumers feel about the economy. So if they feel good about the economy, they're not going to they're going to continue to buy. Next slide, please. Investment now here. So private investment is anything that is purchased by firms to build, provide goods or services. It also includes housing. This was a bit of a bright spot. We did see it kind of go up, indicating that firms perhaps are seeing a replenishing inventories, purchasing new equipment to build a product, or build venues to provide services. So we're seeing that number kind of rise up a little bit. Also, some of that number might be also rising up because of housing expenditures. Next slide, please. Government spending really has not changed outside of the earlier stimuluses. Again, we're really, we've not really realized the infrastructure spending yet, but we expect that to kind of continue to go forward. Next slide, please. Net exports, again, is a number of exports minus imports. As this number is negative, it means that basically we as a nation import more than we export, and this number continues to increase. Next slide. Maryland, we did see some strong growth in Q1, Q2, slow growth in Q3. And you can sort of see some of the results of that strong growth in the budget surplus that we just realized. Next slide. So consumer sentiment, a measure of how happy we are. And you can sort of see this number has been dropping rather rapidly, since 2020. Just as a benchmark, it's basically based out of 100. You can generally see at November 2008, the start of the Great Recession, it was about 55.3. Most recent data has it at 68.8. So people are getting a little bit nervous about the economy. Next slide, please. So again, what we're seeing, and we've seen this rise up, a lot of shelves are empty of goods and services. Inflation has really sort of taken hold. I know earlier on the Fed referred to inflation as transitory, but it's now become rather sticky. Most recent data in December showed a year-over-year increase of about 7% increase in prices, one of the highest rates of increase in prices we've had since the 80s, if I can remember correctly. And what we're also seeing is many shelves in many stores are short of goods, and we're also seeing many services not being able to be provided. Next slide, please. You can back one slide. You can sort of see that inventory of cars is much lower. Typically, we're about 7.7 million fewer cars have been produced this last year. Represents about 3% of global output. In Japan, that resulted in about a 46% drop in their exports. Now, I will say, if you're interested in buying an F1 King Ranch, F-150 King Ranch, excuse me, you can certainly find that on the lots. Dealers are really producing only the high profit margins. And there are a couple of key components that are missing. Some chips, specialized plastics for some of the dashboards. So we're seeing that basically that has risen. Obviously, if you have a used car that you want to trade in some instances you can get at or near what you paid for it prior to at its purchase. Next slide. Again, we're seeing smaller inventories. Again, if you go into a store, it looks a little emptier than it was before. Shipping costs have risen dramatically, almost sixfold in many cases, from about $5,000 per container to about $30,000 for shipping. So it's becoming rather expensive for many retailers to ship goods. Next slide. Again, one of the things is while we see here the Omicron variant impacting US, it also impacts other countries as well. Obviously, when where the factories are having to shut down, which basically means key raw materials aren't being produced, factory production, shipping, retail. So we're seeing basically, oftentimes, it's a key component that might be made in China or in Belgium. If that country experiences a shutdown or a slowdown, that impacts the U.S. because that key component is the one piece that is keeping that piece from being completed. So we're seeing that kind of ongoing. Next slide, please. Again, we're seeing basically inflation, as I mentioned, just take hold. Next slide. Gas prices have been increasing. I just came back from California where gas prices were flirting with about almost $5 per gallon. But here in Maryland, they're about $3.50, $3.60, still higher than they were at the start in the middle of the pandemic. But again, as more people are driving, as again more supply chain issues kind of come about, that's really going to drive up the prices. Next slide, please. Looking at the Baltimore Columbia Towson MSA, you can sort of see that home prices have risen. So obviously, if you have a home and you want to sell it, it is a good time. If you want to buy a home, it is a challenging time to buy that home. Next slide, please. Again, as I mentioned before, we're seeing consumer prices nationally and locally increase rather rapidly. Most recent data, as I said, in December was about a 7% increase in prices annualized. Next slide, please. One of the things is, in the 2008, we saw what is known as shrinkflation. Essentially, what companies did was they kind of made products smaller. So instead of a 16-ounce box of cereal, you got a 13.2-ounce box of cereal for the same price. What we're seeing now is what is known as skimpflation, which is service quality is reduced, often resulting from staffing shortages. So, longer delivery times, hotels, you might not get, as frequent room cleaning, or breakfast. Bars and restaurants are closed in hotels or reduced hours. So we've had shrinkflation and now we have skimp inflation. Next slide, please. And again, as I mentioned, we're talking about sort of the one of the skimflation. One of the causes has been sort of the labor shortages that have been kind of going on. Next slide. Most recent data shows our unemployment rate is dropping rather rapidly. Now, to recall, unemployment is those that are unemployed divided by the labor force, and the labor force is defined as unemployed plus employed. To be considered to be unemployed, you're actively looking for work in the last week, and that number has gone down dramatically. What we've also seen is many people have dropped out of the labor force, so stopped looking for work or have actually quit their current employment. And that's sort of kind of going on here as well. Next slide. You can sort of see here that the number of job openings exceed the number of individuals actually looking for work. We have about 10 million jobs and 8 million people unemployed, so we have quite a gap of individuals that are looking that are remaining open. So oftentimes you're seeing more and more again as people resign and perhaps don't go back in the labor market. Again, much of that may be due to early retirement, lack of good available childcare because they're closing, or they can't get enough workers, or individuals have cashed out because the housing market has been so good, they've been able to sell and retire early. Next slide, please. And this again holds true in Maryland. We're seeing more job openings than individuals actively looking for work. Next slide. And we're seeing people quitting the Great Resignation. Most recent data shows about a 4.9% retirement, which is 4.9 million people have resigned. An incredible amount of people, more so than has in the past, even during the Great Recession. Next slide, please. And we've seen wages kind of dip down, even though inflation has sort of kind of risen, though this trend will likely reverse as we go forward. And this sort of, if you look at this, kind of encapsulated in one slide, next slide, in one slide is sort of the labor force participation rate. So this essentially is the labor force divided by the population, essentially, working age individuals. And you can sort of see that during the beginning of the pandemic, that the labor force, both here in the US and in Maryland, dipped dramatically, but they've not recovered to their pre-COVID levels. So, prior to the recession, Maryland was about 67% of labor force participation rate, and now we're below about 66%. And then the US was about 63%, and now we're about 61.5%. And I should point out, it will never be 100 because many people, aren't in work because they're in school, are in the military, or work in the home as a homemaker. So as a result, this is sort of a concern. So this is where those missing workers kind of manifest themselves in our labor force participation rate. Next slide. So PricewaterhouseCoopers, 65% of employees looking for a new job. Pay, benefits, career advancement, and flexibility are, the key thing. So, look to the left, look to the right. Those people are probably looking for work. Next slide. One of the biggest challenges, obviously, is partisanship in DC. Again, we're looking at trying to get infrastructure bills that did get passed, but the Build Back Better has not done so. Next slide, please. Cost of the government shutdown. Again, just looking at that going forward, we could possibly have a government shutdown in the next legislative term. Next slide. One of the things is 70% of false news is likely to be retweeted. 48% of U.S. adults get their news from social media. All right, next slide. And so we'll probably have different tales, but so next slide. So, one of the good news is vaccination rates are very strong here in Maryland, as well as in the U.S. Next slide. As the workforce is changing, we expect this to be a hybrid economy going forward. We don't expect basically us to return to perhaps in some cases to a 5-day in the office work week. That being said, that also could change as we go forward. But it sounds like basically many individuals are preference towards working from home at least a couple of days a week. And this has impacts in terms of office parks, business parks, commercial real estate is challenging. Some private employers are basically have an indeterminate return date. In fact, some private employers are thinking about making their existing office space into more hoteling space. That is to say, employees will work primarily at home. And then if they need to come into the office, we'll make arrangements to come in the office, but they won't have a permanently assigned space in some cases. So this has have an impact on many of the businesses surrounding those office parks. And finally, we for Maryland, we expect we've got next slide, please. We expect the jobs to recover sometime in 2023, 2024. And again, that's using the information as we have currently. But right now with the current trends, we expect that to be good. Obviously, there are things that could affect that outcome. Next slide. And for the state's gross state product, it'll take a little bit longer, but we expect that it'll continue to grow as we go forward. And that concludes my presentation.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Arwani. So at this time, we have about 10 minutes to take any questions people may have. Do we have any questions? Okay, I guess not. Thank you so much. I mean, just one comment I wanted to make is we're receiving requests from our departments and, reviewing their budget requests for FY23. We are seeing the impact of inflation in some of the contract services and supplies, and especially on the technology side, on our Department of Technology. I mean, it's the whole notion of transitory inflation. I mean, this is, we're seeing like 15% plus increases in some of the products. So, just wanted to share that observation with you.
That is the case, and we expect to see that number. As again, part of it is also scarcity of products, so prices are going to get pushed up. So
exactly. I mean, and especially technology and with certain products, I mean, they've shared with us that they're not even able to get quotes from their vendors because, it's like chasing a moving target because prices are constantly increasing. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now, our next presenter is Jeff Bronown from the Department of Planning and Zoning. He'll be talking about our demographic and land development trends. And Jeff, I understand you were able to do your own presentation. Jeff? Hello? Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah.
Likewise. Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, wonderful. Jeff, are you on the line? Okay, I don't think Jeff has joined us yet. So if the community college is ready, maybe we'll start with the community college. Lynn?
Okay.
Would you like me to? Are you going to be
is it
running
possible
your
for me
own
to
presentation?
share my screen?
Yes.
Is it possible for me to share my screen?
Yes, I think that may be easier if you have that ability.
Okay. the share button isn't activated, I don't think. Otherwise, we'll go let you move it. I can't.
Okay, so I think our technical support folks can make you the speaker and activate your share button.
Okay.
Who's supposed to be presenting right now, Brooke?
Lynn Coleman.
Yes, Lynn Coleman from Howard County Community College.
Okay, I have her. I just elevated her. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and Orson, our technical guys, I see a message from Jeff that he's here, but he's not able to unmute himself. So after Lynn is done with her presentation, if you can please make sure he's unmuted and able to do his presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning, everyone, and it's good to be with you today. I'm Lynn Coleman. I'm the Vice President of Administration and Finance at Howard Community College, and I'm here to talk about our capital and operating budgets. Just to let you know a little bit about the college, we have had a transition. Some of you may be familiar with Dr. Kate Hetherington, who was our former president. She retired October 1st after 14 years as president, 23 years with the college. And we have a new president now, Dr. Daria Willis. We're very excited about her. She started in January. She was the president of Everett Community College in Washington State, and she has come to the college with so many wonderful ideas. So we are very happy to have her on board. So whenever we talk about the college, we always start with our mission, vision, and values. And basically, you can see on the screen that our mission is providing pathways to success. And our values start with innovation and end with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they spell out the mnemonic, inspired. And our strategic goals are always about student success and completion, lifelong learning, organizational excellence, and building and sustaining partnerships. Our core competencies, these are our areas of greatest expertise, include providing an exceptional education experience for our students, facilitating student success, and partnering to achieve success. And we have a number of partnerships as well with other colleges and the county. When you look at our student enrollment, the majority of our enrollment is actually part-time. So that's like 83% of our students are part-time students. Many of them have jobs, some of them working 2 and 3 jobs to go to school. And then we also have about 17% of our students who are full-time. Our student enrollment is about 21,000 for FY21, so mainly with the credit students, and then about 7,500 with non-credit. And you can see on the screen the ethnicity of our student body, and we have about 104 countries represented in our student body. Our market share for residents attending undergraduate in Howard County is 36%. So the other students who are in undergraduate in Howard County, that's about 64%, but we get 36% of the undergraduates that are attending school in Howard County. Most of our students transfer to four-year institutions, and the primary destination for those students is the University of Maryland, College Park, Towson University, and UMBC. Our business model is basically, we are an open access institution. Our doors are open to all, and we get students at varying levels of readiness for college. And so sometimes they need assistance with getting to the college level. And then there are also people who have been out of school for a while and maybe they're just a little rusty with their skills. So we have to sometimes offer courses for them to get up to the college level. We also have a number of diverse learning options for our students. Prior to the pandemic, the majority of our courses were face-to-face. We did have online courses as well, and we still have face-to-face, but with the winter session, we probably have about 11% of our classes are face-to-face, and that will end in February. And then in February, we're expecting about 40%, and we're gradually increasing our face-to-face operations. But the students have requested the online or hybrid learning method. So hybrid means they're both in person and online, so they can take courses that way. We also have what's called scheduled remote, which means you have a class at a specific time that you take, and that's online. And then flexible online is you study on your own time. So those are the methods that students can use to go to Howard Community College. When you look at some of the things that we've done, we're all about being completion and student-centered. And one of the things that we have shown is that with our Black African American population, we are about 2% better with comparators as far as completing. Also about 205% better than our comparators for graduation rates. And also we have a big program, Ambitionis, and that also won a national award just recently in November for best in class in our nation. One of the things that happened with the pandemic, as you can see, we were growing, but things have started with the pandemic. When it started in FY20, we started, we allowed students to continue to drop classes. Normally you have a certain time period to drop classes, but we let them drop until the end of the semester because some people were struggling with what was going on. And that was our FY20 year. And then when we got to 21, you can see we lost a lot of students, especially in our non-credit areas, that really dropped because we have programs such as Kids on Campus, our senior programs that we run. A lot of those programs lost enrollment because people couldn't come face-to-face to take classes. With the state, with our projections, the state MPEC, the Maryland Higher Education Commission, actually does the projections for all the community colleges, and they are expecting our credit area to go back up about 10% over the next 10 years. And also with our non-credit area, that should at least increase about 3.2%. We're anticipating with our non-credit area that once we start offering face-to-face classes again, such as Kids on Campus and our senior enrichment programs, that these numbers will pick up dramatically. But based on the 3.1% the state's projecting will grow, that's what we've shown on this particular screen. When you look at our budget, about 39% of our actual numbers from last year was tuition and fees. 39% came from the county, and then we got about 20% from the state and about 2% from other sources such as our bookstore and other areas on campus that we had smaller operations that we had. Looking at our FY23 budget, our budget issues are merit increases, and I'll show you a few things about that shortly. Adjunct faculty pay, that's very important. And then the legislature last year passed collective bargaining for community colleges. The majority of community colleges do not have unions. Some already had unions, but you had to have a special legislation in your county passed in order to do that. But now all community colleges will have collective bargaining, and that is something we're watching very closely. So starting in September, that process can start. We also are struggling with the loss of HERFA monies. This was federal money. This is in our 23 budget we will be struggling with. We were very fortunate to get a major influx of funds from the federal government to help as the pandemic started. A large portion of that went to our students, but also we had monies that we could use to do things like using Zoom. So we had to get Zoom licenses for everybody. And as mentioned earlier, some of the things that happened during the pandemic, prices started going up with some of our contractors, and we're dealing with that. Things that we still will have to continue to have PPE equipment and things like that on campus, and some of the things that we put in place for the pandemic, but the HERFA funds will no longer be available in our FY23 budget. And we've always looked at trying to increase our full-time faculty ratio. The state has a guideline of having that at 50%. And currently we've done very well with that. So we are at the 48.52% at the current time. So looking at our funding, Howard has been one of the fastest growing community colleges in the state. But when you look at the state amount given per FTE, we basically are at the bottom of the list, and that's primarily because of our growth, because as we grow, the state has been very generous to us, but we did have a cut at one point, and so they cut us, they could cut us all anytime up to 25%. So as you see that we have, the amount we're getting per FTE is less than a lot of all the other community colleges. One of the issues in our budget that I mentioned earlier was merit. And Howard has tried to give merit every year. There have been some years we were unable to give merit based on certain situations. And so last year we were 9th in the state, tied with PG, Hartford, and Allegheny as far as our merit increases. And as you can see, our surrounding counties have also, given higher raises than we have. And that hurts us because we have lost people. We talk about the great resignation. Well, that has definitely been the case at Howard because sometimes we aren't paying what our neighbors are paying. When you look at the 7-year average of what we have given out, it actually amounts to about 1.93%. And that's primarily because there were some years we were unable to give merit to employees. And I think this is, when you're looking at a potential union environment and other things, this is, something to consider. And also, we have a small committee, salary and fringe benefits, and they pointed out to us that, Social Security recipients are getting a 5.9% increase where they are not. So that's just something to consider. Also, our adjunct faculty, as you can see, the rates on here for Howard, we currently rank about 5th in the state for our level 1, and 73% of our adjunct faculty are in the level 1 area, and then it's only about 13% in level 3, and then level 2. But they really have, we have a school with Laurel College Center. We have a location, Laurel College Center, with Prince George's Community College. You can see those teachers are teaching side by side with Prince George's Community College faculty, and they're making less money than the people they're teaching side by side with. I talked earlier about our full-time, part-time ratio, and you can see on here that we've been trying to increase that every year, and so we have gotten to the 48% full-time, 52% part-time. Each year during the budget process, we try to look for ways to reduce our budget. And so this past year in our FY23 budget that we're looking at to present, we have been able to reduce about $250,000 in fixed cost in our budget because we knew we had to pick up other costs. Part-time personnel, we've reduced that about $583,000. And then we had a major study a year ago that saved us over $1 million. And that was, we called it our RPK study, but they looked at all of our academic programs, how we could strengthen that area and also save money as well. And we eliminated a major program, our medical technology lab program. And so that elimination of that program is also going to be saving us money in the FY23 budget. When we look at our capital projects, we really only have 2 projects that are slated in the county's budget. One is our math athletics complex that is currently under construction to open in FY24. One of the things that we're actually facing with that, you talked about shortage of supplies and long lead time of supplies. Well, we're having currently problems right now because the materials that we had selected for the roof, they might not even be available to us until FY25. So we're now looking at having to redesign the roof and other things in order to keep the project on schedule because of the shortage of supplies that we have been facing. Looking at our overall budget, you can see the overall capital budget, rather, what we have requested. The state gives 50% of our money for capital projects, and the county pays the other 50%, and that's for major capital projects. And so the building is being funded that way. And then the county has been kind enough to give us money for deferred maintenance or systemic renovations that we put forward every year and we work on to complete. We also get a small amount that goes through our operating budget from the state for deferred maintenance too, and that's about 400 to 500,000 every other year. We get it from the state, and that goes through our operating budget. So when you look at Howard Community College, we had all the community colleges had an economic impact study, and our graduates earn about $363,000 more than a lifetime if they just had their GED. And the return on their investment is about 14.5%. And for the taxpayers, it's 5.1%. And overall, we have we've contributed to the economy about $343 million. So some of the some recent awards that we've gotten, I mentioned that we got for our Ambitionis program from the Department of Education, examples of Excelencia for our Ambitionis program. We also got a Bellwether Award for some of our technology initiatives. In 2019, the college was one of the few community colleges in the nation to win the Baldrige Quality Award given by the Department of Commerce. And then also we've gotten the Exemplary CEO and Board Relations Award as well. So those are some highlights of the community college and what we're looking at in our upcoming budget.
Thank you so much, Lynn. As always, a great and thorough presentation. I think as you were given the presentation, we did get one question through the chat. And the question is, what percentage of students go to a four-year university, and what percentage complete their undergraduate degree? I don't know if you have that information handy.
I don't have that right the way. I know the majority of our students who do complete go to a four-year, they're transfer students. So that's what, and then we have the nursing program too, but I don't have those exact percentages about graduation and our technical program. So I can get that for you though.
Okay, yeah, if you can send it to me, I'll share it with the panelists.
Right.
Yes. Okay, and does anyone else have any questions for the community college?
Yeah, I do. This is Todd, and I posted that question before.
Okay.
Before I could unmute. Lynn, I think you said somewhere around $360,000 of additional lifetime earnings for your graduates. So I'm assuming that means your graduates mean your AA graduates.
That's all we have. Our AA graduates, yes, they get certificates, and we also have a certificate program too. So for in cybersecurity and other things, yes.
So I guess the question is what percentage of your students graduate? And by extension, then, what are the lifetime earnings increases for the students that don't graduate?
Okay. I know I do. I'm almost sure. I mean, because I have I can get the statistics about the earnings. When they did the study, they really look at the graduating students, so they don't look at the students who maybe come take a course and then leave. So we can't really apply it to that. But I can go back and find what percentage of the students. I can tell in our cohorts when we've had four-year persistence rate, what students complete with college ready. I did bring that data. They are the college ready students who transfer. That's about 84%. Our developmental completers complete about 91% of their programs. And then we have, so those are two statistics on our completers in our programs.
And then in this era of challenges with students who take on student loans, never graduate, never realize the lifetime income increases, but still have their student loans. Do you have information on how many of your students have student loans and how successful or unsuccessful they are in repaying those?
Okay. We, as far as our students who get financial aid, we give a number of scholarships through our foundation, but I would say on not just student loans, it's all scholarships. About 46 to 47% of our students are getting financial aid. Now, if you don't repay the loans, what happens is you have a very high default rate at your college. And so our default rate is very low. I don't have the exact percentage, but it usually had ranged in the somewhere under 5% of students with student loans who borrowed from us and did not complete, did not pay them back, were unable to pay them back. So default rates. So.
Thank you.
Hey, Lynn, this is Leonardo over
Yeah.
at the chamber. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, I can hear you. I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah, so I had a couple of questions. One, you touched on, I guess, the staffing, I guess, challenges, particularly just, I guess, from a pay perspective. And obviously that's going to tie back to the budget and so forth. And so just in comparison to, I guess, let's just say whether it's Prince George's County or I think a couple of the others that you mentioned. One, I guess, has this been something that's, I guess, one, been, I guess, common, so to speak, in the sense that though the other colleges have traditionally paid more, or has it been something that's been kind of recent as it perhaps relates to just the building that's been taking place at the college with the number of capital projects, with the set building, with I think the computer science building and so forth. I guess that's the first question I have.
Well, first of all, because it's the capital and the operating budget, what happens is when we have built those buildings, we have had to find money to operate the building. So having more people, yes, that has been absorbed in our budget to try to hire additional people to operate those facilities. So that has taken up some of the money I guess we could have spent on salaries each year. But as comparable to other schools, you saw, some of the rates. I mean, Prince George's, they got 2% last year, but there have been other years that they have gotten a lot more money in raises than we have at the college. So, and that can be that some of that impact is because we did have to hire people to run the buildings or faculty to run some of the programs in the newer buildings too.
And then I guess another question on that note, just in comparison to the other colleges, and maybe it was on a slide that I missed, but in terms of, I guess, sources of funds, are they perhaps getting monies from any other places that we aren't, or are they just getting more of it, maybe due to their size? So that's, and then I just got one last question after that one.
Okay. Well, for example, we do know like Baltimore County last year, they got an 8% increase from their county and they gave raises that were like 9%. So I can't go through, I don't have the data on every other school, but those are just some of the examples of what happened with the percentages they got from the county versus the percentage that they gave in raises. So.
And maybe, I guess this is speaking to that. And I know you did have a slide, I think, that had sources, and I can go back later and look at it. So just in a general sense, for community colleges, would you say the lion's share then of your money, does it come ultimately from your county as opposed to that from the state?
Oh, absolutely. Because in the earlier slide, I showed 39% of our budget was from the county and 39% was from students. So yes. So, I mean, the students and the county are funding the majority of our budget, although 20% was coming from the state. So.
And then I guess, I know we're going to hear from the school system. I think it's at next week, but as an example, and just thinking about the enrollment numbers, I know on the school system side, they were obviously concerned about what they would get from the state based upon the dip in enrollment that they had and would they be penalized. And I know they were held harmless 1 year and so forth. On the community college side, just because of the pandemic and so forth and the dip in enrollment, does the state do something similar with the community college where at least, or community colleges rather, so you guys ultimately are looked at kind of in a similar sense, particularly in light of the growth that Howard County was having over the past several years up into the pandemic?
Basically, at the state level, we are funded on FTEs. So when our FTEs drop, then our funding drops. But one of the things that we are fortunate enough is that the state has been looking, and the governor in his current budget has proposed trying to raise the percentage that we get. We currently get 25%, I'm sorry, 27% of what the four-year schools are getting. And they're trying to raise that percentage to 30% so we can get more money.
Okay. Thank you.
This is Richard. I have two kind of follow-up questions. One, on your earlier slide, you had kind of the share of revenue from tuition and fees from the students. Is that about the norm for community colleges? And the second question is, you talked about the state aid per FTE being, I think, the lowest for Howard County. Why is that, and is there anything the county can do about it?
Well, all right. On your second question, the funding formula for community colleges is in law. It's mandated in law. So I think, and the fact that they're going to try to increase that percentage, I think that is in the works as far as what we can do, what is being done right now to increase funding to community colleges. And could you repeat your first question? I'm sorry.
Oh, but why are we so much lower than other community colleges for that?
Because of our growth. I mean, so what happens is if the state's giving a certain percentage every year, all right, on the funding formula, 60% is based on growth and 40% is based on a fixed amount. So that's why, as it goes up, as it goes up, because we have grown faster than some of the other colleges, that's why our number has declined from state on a per FTE basis.
Got it. And then I guess the first question was, you had the share of revenues from tuition. Is that, I'm assuming we're about the norm for community colleges,
Yeah,
or
I
is
think
that
our tuition is slightly higher than other. All right, right now Montgomery is the highest as far as tuition goes. Howard is number 3, Carroll's number 2. So we are a little bit higher than maybe some of the other counties, but the majority of funding for community colleges either comes from the students or and some of the smaller ones, they do get more money from their county. And I'm talking about Warwick or Allegheny or Garrett and things like that.
Thank you very much.
Lynn, one other quick question. One of the things that the committee's dealt with through the years is what are the incremental operating costs associated with new buildings? And you just mentioned the Math and Athletics Center and what that's going to do. I'm just wondering what the incremental increase is in your operating costs and staffing costs associated with the commissioning of that building 2 years out.
Okay. I do think for our athletic staff that we will, what we're doing is tearing down an old gym and moving people over into that area. The math department is over in another building and they're moving into that area. So as far as hiring a lot more people, we will have to hire a few people, but I don't see it as the same thing as building a brand new building because they're coming out of another building and that building's being torn down. So we hopefully will have efficiencies in our electricity or our HVAC and other things in the newer building. So that there is going to be an incremental cost. I don't have that exact amount with me right now, but I do know because people are moving out of other buildings that are going away, that will, it's not going to be as much as building a brand new building and having to staff, janitors and other things in the building because we already have them for the current building that's going away. The current gym is being torn down as part of that process, so it's being built in phases. And the math building, the faculty are in another building now that they'll be moving over to that area, but they aren't planning to add a lot more programs in the building. It's just that the building that they're in was not built for a math operation of some of the things that they need. They're in a much older building. So.
Lynn, this is Jennifer Mello, Howard County Board of Education. I have two quick questions. One is, what is the total size of your staff, your teaching staff that we saw on those tier 1, tier 2 scales?
All right. We have, as far as faculty goes, we have about full-time faculty. We have about 600 full-time faculty. I'm sorry, 200 full-time faculty, about 600 full-time staff. So
Okay, what about adjunct? Is that does it
adjunct
include
and
adjunct?
hourly, our total population is about 2,500.
So do you have an estimate of what it would take total to increase the compensation for those adjunct staff, adjunct faculty to be comparable to our surrounding counties and comparators?
It's about, well, all right, in order to do, to have the full-time, the level 1 faculty, and that's where 73% of them are, go up, it's going to cost us to get to their closest comparators. It's going to, let me just see, I do have that number. I think it's around 600. Sorry, I don't have that number right now. It's going to cost us $645,000 to increase the adjunct faculty to be comparable with the other schools.
And are your full-time faculty's pay rates comparable to comparative counties?
Yeah, when we've looked at the median range, they are comparable. They are currently comparable to other schools. So we try to keep them in the upper 1/3. So that is comparable.
Okay, so for less than $750,000, the HCC could be comparable to other teaching staff.
The faculty, yeah, well, yes,
Okay.
because of the, yes. We do, I mean, I guess the issue is at this point is 1% merit is about $500,000. And so we have budgeted merit for our staff, about $3.5 million to get to a 7% increase that we think is needed. So that, because we have to assume that the other schools are going to go up as well. So based on what we have now with the adjuncts, we're talking about 645 and about 3.5 million for full-time staff, which includes faculty and regular employees.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Okay, we have 2 more presentations left, so I think we can take one more question, and we have a question in the chat line. Lynn, the question is, you mentioned there were years where you had no increases in pay for staff.
Yes.
And so the question is, what years were those, and if you know the reasons why COLAs or merit increases were not given in those years?
I know what I gave you was over 7 years. I know there was 1 year that the county, I think, even asked us not to give pay raises. And I don't have the exact, I can get the years. I just have the average, but I don't have the particular years. So, and then we've given around 2% where other schools have given 3, you know, as you saw in the other chart. I mean, Baltimore County gave 9%, Anne Arundel County gave 5%. So we've given like 2% raises over the last few years. And that's comparable with what we've gotten from the county. And our county has been very generous to us.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so.
And I have to speculate, you know, not having the data in front of me, that it probably goes back to right after the Great Recession, where pretty much all your funding sources had declined from the county and the state. So that may be the time where there were no pay increases given. All right, thank you so much, Lynn, appreciate it. And if you can send us that information Todd requested about the graduation rates,
Yes.
I would share it with the group.
Okay.
Thank you. Our next presenter is going to be Jeff Bronown from DPZ. He had technical issues earlier. Hopefully all that is resolved. And Jeff, if you can give it a try now.
Yes, it looks like it's
wonderful.
working. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm going to share my screen here. right, so today what I'm going to do is talk about the Howard County population growth trends and future estimates. We update our projections typically every fall, at the end of each year. So we just updated the projections. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And these projections do include the latest information from the 2020 decennial census that came out actually late summer. So that was the redistricting data set that came out. So the projections include this latest information. Related to that, of course, is new housing and land use. So how those trends will look over time. And then talk a little bit about APFO impact and current leading indicators. The last few years to this committee, we've talked about the impact of AFFO and sort of its impact on growth. So I'll give an update on that. And then lastly, talk a bit about the HOCO by design scenario analysis and the fiscal results of that analysis. So first to talk about population growth. So this is the growth of the county population in 2020. That's the latest and greatest from the decennial census, which was taken April 1st, 2020. And so you can see the population grew from 287,000 about 10 years ago to 332,000 in 2020. So those are actual numbers measured by the census. This chart shows the same information, but it shows the decade growth. So the absolute growth in each decade. That's the blue bars. And then the red percent is the percent change over each decade. So for example, in the 70s, the county had the greatest percent change. The county grew by about 92%. It had the greatest absolute growth in the 80s, and that's when Columbia was going strong and other parts of the county. There was a lot of development and growth occurring during that decade. The county grew by about 69,000. And then you can see since then, the growth has decreased each decade, although the last decade it increased a bit more. The percentage growth stayed the same at about 16%, but the population was slightly more, 45,000 versus 39,000 the decade previous. We actually anticipated not quite that much growth. We anticipated a continuing slowdown in growth. And so the question is, why did that happen? I'll talk about the units in a minute. We experienced about the same number of housing units built, maybe about 100 more per year on average in the 2010s compared to the 2000s. But in general, it was about 1,500 or 1,600 units per year. And the other thing is there's been a lot more apartments and townhomes built this last decade compared to the previous decade. And that's a trend that you'll be seeing moving forward as well. So the question is, why do we see that growth? And then if you look at the census data that just came out, this may explain it in part. And so if you look, this is the decennial censuses for each decade from 1980 to the latest in 2020, and its household size. So you can see the household size was 2.94 in 1980, and then it dropped to 2.71 in 1990, and it's pretty much stayed the same for the last 3 decades. But then it went up, and that was unexpected. In fact, we were anticipating that the household size would decrease a little bit. And many counties in the Baltimore, Washington area, if you look at their projections, they also sort of anticipated household size would decrease slowly into the future, primarily because 2010 is the time that the baby boomers first turned 65. So the next 30 years after 2010, the baby boomers, which is the biggest cohort in the county at the time, actually now millennials are bigger than the baby boomers, but that cohort would age over time, and so typically you would expect smaller household sizes. But that proved wrong, and so household size did increase. So as I showed before, so for Howard County, it went up from 2.72 to 2.77. That's about a 1.8% increase. It's not all that much, really, but if you consider the base of the county of 110, 120,000 housing units, that 1.8% can spread out of the county. That could, that has an impact on the overall population of the county. The overall regional household size did decrease slightly. It stayed about, pretty much the same. 2.54 versus 2.53. And the Maryland as a whole stayed the same. And the only other county in the Baltimore region that went up was Baltimore County. So that went up from 2.48 to 2.52. It's less than Howard County's 2.77. And I think that's about a 1.6% increase. So Howard County had the greatest percentage increase in household size in the Baltimore region. And really the combined Baltimore and Washington regions. So this, you can see the Washington region, at least the counties in Maryland, Frederick, Montgomery, and PG, the household size again stayed pretty much the same. It didn't change that much. Interestingly, PG County currently is the same household size of Howard County at 2.77. So that, that may explain why our population increased more than we anticipated. So that's the base. We have 2020 as the base. The census measured 332,317 people in the county. And we just updated the projections late last year. And this is based on the Plan Howard 2030, the current adopted general plan. I'll talk a little bit in the next, at the end, about the current general plan effort update, the HOCO by design, and the scenarios that we're looking at for those. But we're anticipating that the growth, will increase to 2040 based on current zoning and current policy. And what this looks like is a decrease. So the fact is we're running out of land to build new housing. And so we're anticipating that growth will slow in the future compared to what it has been the last few decades. And that's what we're looking at moving forward. This isn't a huge change from what I presented in the past, these trends of sort of the running out of land. And that's why we're having these discussions. We're updating HOCO by design to see what the future can hold and if we change policies and land use policies and zoning, et cetera. I'll talk a bit about that near the end. So this is what the housing units look like. So the 2021 numbers, we just compiled those, about 1,800 building permits. It was quite a bit. And you'll see that the last 11 years, we've averaged 1,624, and the previous decade was 1,500 or so. You'll see these bumps the last decade. That happens when you have large apartments being built. So the majority of the percentage of apartments is greater now and into the future than it has been relative to the past. You can see the single family detached is somewhat decreasing and townhomes as well. But whenever apartments are built, you get these spikes each year. So for example, the new apartment building in downtown Columbia, the second one that's being built there in the Meriwether district, that's, I think, 472 units. So we have 472 units in one building. You're going to get a spike and you're going to get this, 889 total apartments built for that year. And you can see, I mentioned this, the percentage of multifamily is greater more recently compared to the past, and those trends are expected to occur moving forward based on our land use, what's left to build in the county. So this chart shows our current existing housing units as of September 2021 of about 124,000 almost. And then the so-called build out is 142. And again, that's based on current zoning and current policy, and includes, the downtown Columbia plan, for example. The four in between, the four bars in between really show what's in the pipeline in Howard County. We track it pretty closely. We have a land use database. And so we track, when building permits get issued, we track when lots get recorded. That's the unbuilt. When lots get recorded, or there might be a site plan approved for an apartment building that doesn't have a building permit yet, that would be in the unbuilt category. And then we also track in process units. So those are units in site plans or subdivision plans that DPZ is reviewing. And once they get reviewed and recorded, then get building permits, they'll be built, in the next few years. And then undeveloped is basically everything that's uncommitted, basically based on land use and zoning. That does include a lot of downtown Columbia. So as downtown Columbia comes in with their sort of final development plans, those units would turn into in process. But you can see there's about 19,000 units left, our best estimate. These things change. And If there's a piecemeal zoning change, these numbers do change each year, but that's a snapshot in time, about 19,000 units left in the county. And that's about 1,000 units a year for the next 20 years. So if you compare that to the 1,600 new homes per year, it's a drop. It's close to a 40% drop. And that's what we should anticipate based on Plan Howard, 2030. There will be changes, or there could be changes based on whatever policy is adopted for HOCO by design. But even if those policies are adopted, for example, gateway redevelopment, which is one of the things being talked about, that will take time because policies need to turn into regulations and zoning changes. So, but then again, you are looking at a 20-year time frame. So these are all things to consider. I think in the near term for this committee, it's probably important to start thinking about how the growth is slowing in the county and will continue to slow moving forward, at least in the next 5-10 years. So this is the same information, but it really shows the types of units moving forward. So right now, about half of the units in the county are single family detached. You can see 22% are townhouses, 26% apartments. In the future growth, it's going to be about a third of single family detached based on our zoning. And again, this is based on Plan Howard 2030. This may change once we adopt the HOCO by design. And you can see that a large portion, more than half, will be apartments, primarily in downtown Columbia and the Route 1 corridor. This is by planning area. So this is the total units. The blue is the existing units, and then the colors above that are the different units of the pipeline. So you'll see what will be built in the future, and this represents build out based on our current estimates and current zoning policies, et cetera. The planning areas, as a reminder, look like this. And so Elk Ridge is the northeast part of the county. This black line, it really divides, shows where Elk Ridge planning area is. Columbia is what you think of Columbia. It includes the out parcels, as well as the Newtown zone land, which is the CA land or Columbia, as we think of Columbia, but it does include quite a bit of out parcels in between. So it's this region here. The southeast goes up to 175 down the Route 1 corridor through to Maple Lawn, and then Columbia on the north part. And then the rural west is 60% of the county, everything to the west, no water and sewer. Ag land preservation is the priority, has been since the 80s, even the 70s, really. It's been our policy of the county. And then Ellicott City is the northeast part of the county up here. So going back, you can see that, the greatest housing units are in Columbia, and the greatest future housing units also will be Columbia. So this is the downtown Columbia plan. And you can see there's relatively not much left in the other planning areas. The second greatest is Ellicott City, followed by Elk Ridge, and then the southeast, and then the rural west, given its rural zoning and the preservation emphasis. This is the same thing, just the top, it cuts off the top of those bars. So you can see the units of this 19,000 by planning area there. And then, so if you take a snapshot of all land use in the county, as of the fall of last year, about 35% is developed residential with homes built on them. About 19% is commercial, industrial, and transportation. That basically roadways and utility right-of-ways. That's about 19%. Undeveloped land is only 7%. So there's not much, and the majority of that is actually in the rural west. And so it's anticipated that some of that will turn into ag pres, given our ag pres policies, or environmental preservation in the rural west. So there's really not much left to develop in terms of raw land. So that's why we're really focusing on redevelopment moving forward. And HOCO by design is looking at that. It really started with the last general plan, Plan Howard 2030, this discussion of redevelopment opportunities moving forward. And then if you can see the parks and open space and preservation easements, the county's done a great job, given the foresight of previous leaders in the 70s and 80s, setting policy for parks and open space and agricultural preservation, et cetera. So 39% is permanently preserved. That's likely to creep up each year. It goes up a little bit. That's our land use map. And so, by the way, that's online. So if you go to our GIS website, I think it's data.howardcountymd, there's an interactive map. And so you can zoom into this and see the various land uses. Just if you pay attention to this light yellow, that's undeveloped residential, there's not much of it. There's just little spots here and there. So this really shows that the county is not much room to grow in terms of future development. And most of the commercial and industrial land is along the Route 1 corridor. Here's the gateway area. We'll be talking about that in a minute with HOCO by design. And then you can see all the open space and preserved ag easements in the rural west. And a lot of parkland also in the east too, Rockburn Branch and some easements in this area, conservation easements, state park. So a lot of state park land. This is all WSSC land, the Washington Suburban Sanitary District that provides water a little bit to Howard County, but mostly to Montgomery and PG counties. And of course, CA open space, a lot of CA open space in the park system in CA. So that's sort of growth in a nutshell in current land use. And I'll give updates on APFO. You know, this was presented to this committee the last few years. As you know, there were some changes to APFO in 2019, which reduced the point where schools are closed to new development. What that basically means that if a school is projected to be 105% for elementary schools, then the development that's proposed in that school district cannot move forward until the capacity is less than 105%, and it's measured annually. And if it's not less than 105%, then the project is on hold for another year. It can be on hold for up to 4 years, five tests, they're so-called tests. So it had been 115% and it dropped to 105%. For middle schools, it was 115% and it dropped to 110%. And the high school test was added. So there was no high school test previously, and that was added, and the capacity limitation was 115%, effective in July 2019. And, you know, APFO began in 1992, and it has changed over time. There was a middle school test added in the 2000s, so APFO has changed over time, and this is the latest change that has occurred as of July 2019. Some other changes include these things as well, and we've been, you know, applying these updated regulations since that time. This is the latest map that shows, based on the APFO chart, which the school system provides to the county. The Board of Education adopts the chart based on it really comes from the feasibility study. So a lot of thought and planning and foresight go into these estimates. That gets forwarded to the administration, and we pre-file it for county council adoption. So the county council adopts the school capacity chart typically each July. And what this map depicts is based on the 40 plus elementary schools, the 20 or so middle schools, and the 12 high schools, soon to be 13th high schools. These are the areas that are closed because the capacity limits that I showed on the previous page have been, you know, exceeded. So if a development were to come in to an area of here, it would come in initially at the initial plan stage, take the schools test once that plan was approved, and it would have to wait for up to 4 years before moving forward. So this was put together also in previous years to this committee. We're calling it leading indicators because this is plans or subdivision plans that are coming into the county. All subdivisions are required to have what's called a pre-submission community meeting. So even before they submit the plan to DPZ for review, they have to have a meeting with the community to let them know, a public meeting to let them know that the development is planned in this area. Then they have up to a year to submit that to DPZ. We review it, and then, you know, we ultimately approve the plan to move forward. So if you look at the history of pre-submission meetings, there's been about 24 meetings every 6 months. Since APFO was effective in July 2019, those numbers of meetings have dropped. So there's a clear change here. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is there's a lot of other factors. The economy, we are running out of land, so the opportunity development is less. So there, you can't blame APFO only for this, but it probably has a large part to do with it. But there's other factors at play. Just something to keep in mind. So those are actual meetings. These are units. So you can see that prior to the change in APFO, there was about 743 units proposed every 6 months in these pre-submission community meetings. That adds up to about 1,500 a year, which is what we've been building over the last, decade or so. And then since the effective date of APFO changes, it's dropped to about 208. So this is a leading indicator because these meetings, these plans that are coming in now, they're going to be on the ground in the next, 3-4 years. So this really is looking far in the future. What's being built now? You saw what was it, like 1,800 units built. Those are things that are being permitted now that had meetings maybe 3-4 years ago. So there's a fair amount in the pipeline. But if looking forward, in probably the next 5 years, we're going to see a slowdown. On average, it's 1,000 units per month, but it could be that some years we might get 500 units per month. So that's something to consider when you're thinking about the fiscal impacts of growth moving forward. So that leads us to HOCO by Design. Several of you have been involved in HOCO by Design and graciously have served on the PAC, the Planning Advisory Committee, or the various advisory groups. Been very helpful. And we have on the website, for those that don't know or are interested, please go to this website. It has the history of the HOCO by Design planning efforts, all the public meetings, lots of information that has occurred over the last year or so as we've been working on HOCO by Design. A lot of public outreach. Part of HOCO by Design, we did a scenario document, and so that's also available online. And there's a not only the document itself, but there's a very nice story map. So it sort of walks you through the scenario planning. These are the 4 scenarios we looked at and analyzed. And as you can see, each scenario, the total units from A to B to C to D increase. So the scenario A is about 19,000 units. Scenario B increases to 23. Scenario C is 28. Scenario D is 36. And same with the employment. Scenario A is really Plan Howard 2030. So it's really trends. So it's really the impact of if we do nothing in terms of changing policy. This is what we anticipate. Now, what we have experienced in terms of jobs is about 60,000 jobs, or about 3,000 jobs per year over the last 20 years. So this is cut in half. So just as the units are dropped by 40%, the employment is going to also, based on land use, decreased about half of what it is. The market study that was also, you can see that online and part of this plan, says there's a market for 30,000 dwelling units over the next 20 years. So that was, and also the market study indicates, I think, 60,000 jobs over the next 20 years. So that really is around these, looking at scenario D or scenario C, about 30,000 units in C. If we were to achieve what the market is indicating based on the market study conducted by a company called RCLCO, this is what the market is asking for. And not only is it 30,000 units of just housing units, that's typical demand, which is really the trend of what we've been experiencing. The market study also indicates there's about a 20,000 deficit in affordable housing units based on the market. So it's really about 50,000 units. Now, of course, we don't have the land use for that, but these are the scenarios that we've analyzed and are working with moving forward. And so you'll see on this report, there's other indicators, but I want to just focus on the fiscal aspect of it. And this committee has seen fiscal studies in the past with urban analytics. In fact, the committee asked that a fiscal study be done in response to the changes to APFO to determine what the impact may be. And what we learned from that, And what this latest fiscal study that we did for HOCO by Design also confirmed is that the more growth you have, the more net revenues you have. So growth is a net positive to the county. And so you can see the revenues increase over time. The costs also increase over time, but the net fiscal impact also increases over time. And you can see the results. And that's really the sort of the lesson to learn is or not lesson, but rather than the actual numbers, focus on the numbers. It's a concept that growth historically, growth is built into the structure of the county. So growth in general pays over time moving forward in Howard County. And so why does growth generate net revenues? Here's some reasons for that. And this came out actually also in the Urban Analytics fiscal impact study done a couple of years ago. These points, new homes are generally larger and more expensive than homes built in past years. So you have a natural tendency to have increased revenues. 90% of revenues to the county come from property taxes and income taxes. And more expensive homes generate higher income to the county because to afford those homes, you have higher income. We are talking a lot about missing middle and trying to come up with policies for affordable housing. I mentioned those 20,000 units. To the extent that you can do that, that would mitigate this concept that I'm speaking on now. The second point is, and this is a discussion of how the structure, the budget structure of the county builds in growth. In other words, it sort of knows growth is coming and has structured the budget around that. County's been growing, as you've seen in the previous slides, for the last several decades, since the 60s really. And so you craft your budget around that. And there's a lot of one-time revenues that come in. And this second bullet point highlights how much a typical house may pay, $34,000 one time upon building permit. And then non-residential, the county's been really the last 5-10 years, because of the base realignment and closure and Fort Meade growth, has done really well with non-residential. A lot of office space has been built, and that also pays road excise tax, transfer taxes, and of course, contributes to property tax revenues increasing over time. And I think Larry Tweel might have showed the assessment ratio, and non-residential has been doing well lately. Now, in the future, that's a question. What's going to happen to office? We don't have a lot of land left for non-res, similar to residential as well. If you're interested in the details, this report is also on the HOCO by Design website, so you can look at the details and all the assumptions that went into this. So I just have a couple more slides and I'm finished. So what's the conclusion and considerations? New growth generates positive fiscal impacts. Yes? I'm sorry, I thought I heard something. Howard County and all counties in Maryland, actually, given the fact that we have a local income tax, is really the reason why residential is positive, because there is a local income tax. Many counties in the country, most counties in the country, there is no local income tax. And Howard County is not unique. It's all counties in Maryland, really, growth is generally a positive from a fiscal standpoint. I mentioned bullet 2, the one-time revenues I mentioned. If you look in the details of the fiscal study, schools, capital, and operating are the most significant costs, about 60% of the costs. One thing to keep in mind is that the county is getting older. It's middle-aged, late middle-aged, and so we're going to need to maintain and rebuild existing infrastructure. In the past, you could have had 80% of the capital revenues going to new schools. Now you need to start rebuilding schools that are 40, 50, 60 years old. And there's equity issues related to that. So it's very challenging because you have limited dollars chasing more needs. And I mentioned the last bullet point. So basically, as growth slows, we might have to rethink about budget level of service adjustments in the county. But it's also important to note, I think, that it's not just growth that we're dependent on for positive fiscal structures. There's a lot more that has to do with the budget. Like, for example, this year, property taxes increased all throughout the county in the state of Maryland. So that's going to be a positive. That has nothing to do with growth. Income taxes, I believe, are going up because income, in large part, the capital gains from the stock market, which has done so well. And so a portion of the income tax from Howard County residents goes into that. Of course, if there's a recession, the opposite occurs. So, as we all know, there's lots of dynamics in trying to predict the budget for it. And this is the sort of this comes from the scenario planning guide, includes some words on some of the points I just mentioned. We did include in this guide some information that your committee, the Spending and Affordable Advisory Committee last year, put in their report. And so we just added that because it's clearly fiscal challenges are ahead, or is a clear thing that we want to pay attention to and look at growth from that perspective. But there's other perspectives too that are also important to look at. And so I have one more slide after this. This is about HOCO by design. And so these themes, which are going to turn into chapters, came out during the process. These general themes. And so these are the themes that the actual document's going to be structured around these themes. And over the next few months into this, into 2022, these themes and the policies that are coming out of these themes, based on all the public feedback we've already received, we've had lots of meetings. I don't know how many hundreds of hours of public meetings in person and online, challenging during COVID, obviously, but we've had a lot of meetings. The goal was to try to reach out and have a public process as best we could, and we did a great job with that. So there's been a lot of thought put into these chapters and themes and policies, and so now those are going to be put out there and to get more public input over the next year, with the goal to have the draft plan completed in 2022 to move forward for adoption. So that's where we are now, and this is pretty much the slide that I just referred to. So we're at the stage of putting the themes together and having public review of the draft policies, so we could determine how best we want to move forward in the future. And with that, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Jeff. I think we have about 25 minutes left, and we still have the library system scheduled to do a presentation, so we can only take a couple questions. I'll first read a question that was submitted in the chat line, and the question is basically asking if you have a breakdown of the percentage of units that are age restricted in the county.
Yes, we do. We put out an annual development monitoring system report each year, and I think it's around 18%. It's been increasing over year. That's not 18% of all units. I'm sorry. That's like 18% of units that have been built over time, although it is slowing down. But policies were introduced over the last 10, even 15 years of trying to promote age-restricted housing, and there has been a fair amount built. I don't know what the percentage is overall, though.
Okay. I mean, I don't know if you have that information. You can send to us so I can share with the group if you do have it available.
Yeah, I'll send that.
Okay.
Hey, Jeff.
Does anyone else have any? Oh.
Yeah, Brooke and Jeff, this is Todd. Jeff, as always, thank you. It's always instructive. I'm wondering, kind of looking forward to the changing character of housing categories. Do we know by now what our county revenue per resident is by housing category currently, and then how those housing categories change over the next 20 years? What will be the impact of overall county revenue as those percentages change amongst those three categories?
Right. So the fiscal study actually didn't look at the prototypes, like the fiscal impacts of a single family house, I can tell you that actually, I think the urban analytics study did look at that. And, single family detached is the greatest net revenues, followed by townhomes, followed by apartments. So apartments still do produce positive fiscal impacts. So the mix with a greater percentage of apartments compared to single family detached, the positive net revenues will be less relative to the past.
Yeah, I'm looking at just from a static perspective. If we're looking at county revenue per resident going down from what it is now because of the increasing percentage of multifamily over the next 20 years. So let's just use a baseline. Let's say we're getting $10,000 per resident now with our current housing mix. Will we be getting $11,000 per resident with the new housing mix 20 years from now, or $9,000 per resident? And it's more just thinking about, all right, over time, what do we need to do to be planning for either an increasing or a decreasing amount of revenue per resident?
Right. I mean, that's something to look at. It's really hard to measure that, in my view, because you can have really expensive apartments with people making a lot of money. And the other thing is that you could try to measure it. I'm not saying you can't measure it. You could try to measure that. But the other thing to keep in mind is that the costs are also less because there's less school children. So, for example, a studio or a one-bedroom apartment in downtown Columbia is not going to have any school children. And with 60% of the costs being to the county capital and operating schools, you're not going to have that cost. So it's really not only just the revenue per resident. It's also the sort of the net impact of what that house may bring.
Right. Thanks.
Yeah.
This is Richard. I pulled up the old urban analytics study, and it was a net surplus in 2018 for single family of about 5,000 per single family detached, about 3,500 per unit for attached, less than 1,000 for apartments, and about 4,000 per condo, and a net operating benefit per prototype.
Thank you, Richard. And Richard was an author on that study, so this is coming from a very good source.
All right. I just, by the way, chatted with staff of the library system, so you're not going to have enough time to complete their presentation, so we'll try to schedule them for next week, and I apologize for that, and thank you for your patience. So if we have more questions, we have time to ask.
Yeah, I guess I have a question.
Directed to Jeff.
In the past, Larry talked about the lack of available space for employment-based development. Could you talk about how the current plan addresses that? And the commercial obviously is something that pays a lot more per acre than residential in terms of net surplus. That might be a means of addressing some of the concerns raised in the scenarios.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's a good point. There isn't much commercial land left. There's two parts to that. One is also EDA really wants to try to preserve industrial land and warehouse land, because that's a big part of the future economy is warehouse distribution. Howard County's location right off of 95 and the trains and everything. So now industrial doesn't necessarily produce as great of revenues as, for example, office, right? But it's an important part of the county, and you don't want to, get rid of that. In fact, EDA is really promoting trying to not convert that to housing, for example. And so we've been working with the concepts that has brought forth and trying to preserve industrial land. As far as the shortage of office space, that's a clear thing. There is a lot of office space planned in downtown Columbia as part of the plan, and not a lot of it has been built yet. The question is there a market for it? That's the other thing. Is there a market? And that's the big question. It seems like the market's slowing down, but I'm not an expert on that. And the question is people working remotely and how it's going to impact that. There are discussions as part of HOCO by design, which we're looking 20, 30 years in the future, a gateway. It would be a nice mixed use innovation center where you could have housing next to office and innovative. You could have like a R&D area or an education sort of setting there. So there's a lot of opportunities for future commercial in places like Gateway, if you think for future development in Howard County. So that would be an opportunity. We're not going to build all housing at Gateway. We definitely do it. If Gateway goes forward, and what HOCO by Design is thinking of putting is a master plan would have to be done first. A detailed study of what could potentially happen in Gateway, what people would want to be in Gateway. And of course, the property owners, would have to be part of that whole discussion. So Gateway really is sort of one of the future places for Howard County in terms of future opportunities.
What about assemblage? I mean, does the county have appetite for assembling land on Route 1? I mean, as you've talked about in the past, the scattershot nature of property ownership is a huge barrier to cohesive development.
Yeah, and I think HOCO Design is going to include policies that's going to try to make that happen in a better way. That concept has been there since really the 2000 general plan, and it's been very difficult. The parcel assemblage, having private property owners do that it's difficult to do. Having county policy to try to incentivize that, some of that has been put in place, but it really hasn't led to much. So that's also something being thought through in HOCO by Design and best practices. We can look at it and put policies in place to try to make that a reality, because there is opportunity there.
Thanks. I'll shut up now.
Okay, thank you, Richard.
Hey, Jeff, question for you. In answering a couple of questions ago, and if I heard this wrong, please correct me. You were talking about Columbia downtown, and you made the statement that there typically aren't any children feeding into the schools from Columbia downtown. And I would think that with more families, moving, going the apartment route as opposed to a single family home route, whether it's because of cost or inventory or whatever, there would be, those units producing children into the school system. So I just want to go deeper into that because it sounded like you were saying that doesn't happen, but I would think it would happen more and more going forward.
Right, that's a really good point. And we're actually looking forward to when the census data comes out. The 2020 census, so far we just have the redistricting data, which is just total population by race, total housing units, and occupancy. It doesn't include housing unit type. So we're interested in looking at how what you just said, it has the students per apartment unit increased. So I think you're right, but it really depends on where. So in downtown Columbia, if 80% of the units are one bedroom and studios, or 70% or 60%, you're just not going to get a lot of kids out of there. The market isn't families for those types of places. And if the majority of apartments are being built in downtown Columbia, then you sort of have the dynamic I mentioned. But clearly, yes, other parts of the county, Route 1 corridor, et cetera, apartments that are more 2-3 bedrooms, that could generate more kids than they have in the past. Or existing apartments. There's a lot of, Howard County has a very diverse housing stock with only, for a suburban county with only 50% single family detached. And that's large part due to Columbia, really. We do have a lot of townhomes and apartments. So it could be that with, the recycling of neighborhoods, that families, given affordability issues with kids, there's more of them living in apartments and townhomes than single family detached. So that dynamic can certainly happen, but I think it's geographically dependent.
No, thank you for the clarification on that. And just one last quick question. Have you guys in your design process for HOCO by Design done any modeling or anything of that nature, taking into account potential further restrictions placed within APFO? I know that, there's a piece of legislation now talking about, I believe it's CB9, talking about as it relates to the carve out for more moderate income housing units. And then, there are other things floating out in the ether where folks talk about further, driving those schools tests down even further. And then obviously, talk of the increase in the school facility surcharge. Has any of that been taken into consideration?
So all those things have been talked about in many different venues as part of HOCO by Design, for sure. because they're so important. So, you know, there has been some talk of actually changing AFFO, making it less restrictive, in large part sort of following Montgomery County, what Montgomery County has done recently. Given that the county is now a redevelopment county, or moving towards that, does AFFO, the way it's been designed back in 1992, still work? How can AFFO be changed? And so those are really important questions. And I think the policies in HOCO by design will basically say we need to look at that. Part of AFFO requires that a new AFFO committee be convened within 1 year after the new general plan is adopted. So that AFFO committee will be answering, you know, many of these questions. Is AFFO working? How can we change it to make it work better in a redevelopment sort of environment?
All right. Thanks, Jeff. And so it's not to go on longer than my old buddy Richard, I will now yield. Thanks a lot. Appreciate the answers.
Yeah, Rocco, yeah.
Thanks, Steve, for throwing me under the bus.
Hey, Jeff. Steve Hancock
Anytime.
here. Real quick question I posted in the chat here. Of the net revenue number that is discussed in the HOCO by design analysis that was done, how much of that is one-time funding on an annual basis, roughly? What percentage?
Yeah, I don't know the percentage, but if I think in that one chart that I shared, you can probably determine it from that because it has the one-time revenues in there.
Okay, thank you.
So that you might be able to tell from that, and it's important to keep those are average annuals. So basically, it's an average. The 1 year of 30,000 is a lot of money per house, but that's only one-time revenue, so it's averaged out over 20 years, right? So
No, I understand. I'm looking at it
okay.
from a, you know, as we look at different opportunities that are being discussed right now for development with the limited stock that's left moving into redevelopment, as you talked about. You know, we run the risk of losing, you know, we're paying for services with one-time monies that won't be there at some point. So how do we prepare ourselves for that over time? And hearing 20 years it seems like a long time away, but it's really not that far.
Right. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Steve. Do we have any other questions for Jeff? Okay. Thank you so much, Jeff. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right. I think we get to finish a little bit early this morning. Just a reminder, as I mentioned early, next week we'll have Dr. Clinch do a presentation. We're also anticipating to have Dr. Materano from the school system talk about his proposed budget. And we'll also have the library system rescheduled to do their presentation next week. And again, thank you for your patience, Sonia and Angela. All right, thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Brooks.
All right, take care.